watching Property TV.
Hello, I'm Stephen Galpin and welcome to Property Matters. You know, it's only 30 years ago estate agents and property professionals were relying on books like this to provide locational information and price levels on the capital's residential properties. However, using information almost 12 months old by the time the reader got his hands on the publication, the worth of this information was at best questionable. Boy, how we've moved on. In a world where algorithms tell our suppliers what we're going to buy next and economic trends are calculated with amazing accuracy, we all need to understand the value and purpose of data in our businesses and indeed our day-to-day lives. Joining me today to look at the database journey we're all taking is Katy Billany, Executive Director of TwentyEA, one of the country's leading data providers. Welcome, Katy.
Thanks very much, Stephen.
Okay, well, I think what we need to do is understand where we've come from, really. So, as I said, in years gone by, probably before you can remember, we were using books like this to say, well, this street is so-and-so, this value is so-and-so. But of course, now you collect data, you put it all together, and I just wonder where that journey started. What sort of sources did you use for getting those first bits of data to assess?
Well, to be honest with you, Stephen, I mean, it started with you know, the kind of journey that you're talking about. I think that it's very interesting that estate agents and anybody working in the property sector used to get their information from books like that, you know, delayed data from HMRC. But with the dawn of property portals and the start of digitisation, it became a lot easier because data became public information and it was readily accessible. And so really that's where the journey started. I mean, my career in the property sector actually started with a company that used to drive around every street in a particular town. They'd have a person in a car with a dictaphone, and they would record the addresses of properties with a for sale or sold board outside.
Sounds like a sort of unsophisticated version of Google Maps being created, doesn't it? But...
Exactly. You know, and then they'd then send these tapes up, and somebody would sit there and type up the tapes, and they would be sold to estate agents because that was how they got their data. You know, traditionally estate agents would do their own board counts. You know, they'd send their negotiators out to walk the streets. Thankfully, with the digitisation of the marketplace, it has made more data readily available, and it means that now at the touch of a button we can provide data to estate agents, to investors, to developers on market conditions, data for marketing campaigns, information to research particular properties, or if you're a developer and you want to know whether you should be building a particular development in a certain area, all of that data is available in minute detail from suppliers like ourselves, but also, you know, across the property sector now.
So when you started collecting this data, and like any commercial entity, you want to sell it, did you find a resistance from perhaps in particular the smaller agents, you know, the one-man bands or the 2 or 3 sort of outlet agencies, rather than, I mean, I can quite see that the portals that came in the late 90s would be keen for this information, but I don't know about the smaller agent. What would you...
I think that there has been a bit of a sea change. You know, there have always been very traditional agents that know their patch. You know, they think that everybody knows them and their brand, and that they don't need to do anything more. But that really has changed over more recent years. I think with the growth of the prop tech industry has made a huge difference, because there is a little bit of a fear of missing out. You know, if agents see that everybody else is doing something and that they are growing their market share, then it means that they do kind of become a little bit less entrenched in their traditional beliefs.
I mean, I've twice been involved in the agency sort of business, and I can remember after leaving the first time going back into what was quite a substantial firm of sort of chartered surveyors. I walked into this room that had totally changed. It was just a sea of computers and people sat there typing away, and I thought, what are all these people doing? You know, why aren't they out in the streets? Why aren't they selling stuff? Why aren't they, you know, and the whole thing had changed very quickly. And I think in the 90s, really, and early 2000s, it really significantly changed. And as I say, I was just quite interested as to whether that change was first taken up by the big firms, or whether some of the smaller firms were actually feeling very progressive about life and sort of really got into this.
Yes, actually, I think that some of the smaller firms can be the ones that are the trailblazers. Often, it's easier for small agents, smaller businesses generally, to make those changes. If you're a huge organisation, you know, with a 1,000 branches, like Connell's, for example, then actually implementing something new and testing new technologies, not to say that they don't do that, but you know, it's more difficult for them to do it. Whereas, you know, if you're a small agent with 1 or 2 branches, it's really easy for you to adopt new things, to test things, and to hone what works. So I do think that actually smaller agents, you know, they make up the majority of the marketplace anyway, and they are the real leaders in kind of adopting data-led technologies.
Okay, I'm quite interested then to learn how you collect this data. Who do you go? How many data points do you have, for instance? I mean, where does it come from?
So we've got over 4,500 different data points. So not only do we track the entire property market, so over 99% of all sales and lettings listings that are on the market at any one time.
And that comes from where?
It comes from our over 4,000 different data sources. So rather than it just being one particular, you know, data source where you could...
Like the Land Registry or whatever.
Yeah. For example, obviously the Land Registry, we have their data in-house. Obviously tracking completions and things like that is really important, but the majority of our data is more real-time than that. So given the delays in the marketplace due to COVID, actually the Land Registry data, the completions publications traditionally have been about 3 months behind. They're far more than that at the moment. So actually having alternative data sources that both agents and other property industry kind of, you know, suppliers and players can use is really important. So for us, it's about developing real-time access to that data. So for example, an estate agent can see exactly what's happening in the marketplace within a day or so of something taking place.
Okay. I mean, it is quite sensitive, the information. I mean, I can remember, say, going back years, people would say, oh, it's no good looking at Land Registry data. It's 3 months out of date, it's 6 months out of date. Or if we have a period like now where things have got behind because of COVID, absentees and that sort of thing. I mean, it's almost pretty useless information now, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's
your real time access.
If you're looking for real time information, then absolutely. I think that one of the things that the Land Registry data is really useful for is tracking the sold prices of properties, because actually, you know, there's very little data out there unless you went to each estate agent and asked how much they agreed on the property. It's not published until it's sold. So there's definitely real value in the Land Registry data in that context, but actually for everything else, you know, there's so many other different sources and tools that agents and other market experts should be using to both track their market share, to power their marketing campaigns, and to look at trends in the marketplace. So, you know, going back to your book from 1990, actually being able to see what was happening in the market. You know, at the moment we've got real stock shortages, but actually that kind of information would have been anecdotal at that time. It would have been agents saying it to certain people, and then it being passed, you know, around the industry. But now you get that published in the newspaper on a regular basis because of the fact that that data is accessible in real time.
And again, the validity of the information. I mean, we've always had in the property industry the difficulty of people saying, well, that's the price because that's what was agreed. No, was it exchanged at that level? And then if it wasn't exchanged, well, did it complete at that level? You know, it's a sort of tri-party thing, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got to be very careful of where that data comes from. Now, so assume I'm a small agent, how would I approach a firm like yours to get this data? Would I buy particular subject matter? Would I have a sort of cross-industry app to access, or how does it work?
So it really depends on exactly what you want. So our data covers the various different aspects of the marketplace that I just mentioned. So we've got tools that can allow agents to track their own market share against their competitors. We've also then got upfront property information. So we, as well as tracking the property market, us alongside other suppliers in the marketplace who have a database that covers, you know, every single residential property in the UK. So having that level of upfront information that agents can provide to both their vendors and the prospective sellers up front makes a big difference. So, you know, saying, oh, well, what schools are nearby, what's their Ofsted rating, what's the square footage of this property, before you've even gone to view it, you know, you can now access all of that kind of information online.
Katie, I'm almost glazing over at the horror and the thought of having to implement this into a company structure.
It's massively simple, Stephen, simply because of the digital developments that we've made. So everything is accessible online, and it's what we call a software as a service tool. So, you know, for all of our products and the majority that are available across the PropTech space, that's how agents access them. It's just a simple online login.
Okay, and is this a sort of organically growing thing? So, for instance, if you sign somebody up to take your data, do you actually take data from them too? Is it a sort of, is it no?
No, actually, that's one of the things that we get asked a lot is, you know, if I work with you, are you going to sell my data on? And the answer is, as I just said, very strong no.
Okay.
We do have clients where we do take in their data to create products for them, but it is completely ring fenced. So we don't take data from any of our clients because for two reasons. You know, they don't want to be seen to be selling their own clients' data, but equally they don't want us to be passing on their data to other agents, you know, within our products. So absolutely not.
Okay, and let's just take the sort of last 5 years perhaps, which is probably the most relevant period in your sort of industry. What sort of year-on-year growth have you had in the taking in of this data?
So the taking in of the data has remained relatively static. You know, we've apart from the fact that, you know, we've been increasing our number of sources. So what we do is we take data from multiple sources, so that we're not just kind of saying, you know, here, this is the information, and we're relying on one source to have fed it to us. We can actually cross-match it against multiple different sources to check the validity of it. So if we're saying that, you know, 1 Acacia Avenue in Southwark is on the market, we can check that across the different suppliers that we work with to make sure that it is accurate. So we've grown in the number of data sources. So in terms of you know, the infrastructure that's needed to support that's been a big development. But then the other aspect for us is looking at the full address match rate. So Essentially what that means, yes, I can see you've glazed over a bit again.
Yeah.
Essentially what that means is it's very easy for a lot of businesses to track the property market. So it's very easy, it's public information to be able to say, this is Acacia Avenue, it's on the market with Knight Frank and it's on the market at £550,000. But actually being able to definitively confirm what number Acacia Avenue it is more difficult, and so that's one of the areas where we've really been working on in the last few years. And
so it's just finessing the accuracy, really,
yes,
isn't it?
yeah, absolutely, and giving our clients more usable data. So essentially, what's important to them is especially if they're using it for marketing campaigns, it's no use to not know what house number it is that they want to send a letter to.
Okay.
So for us, that's been one of our biggest.
You're well up on the agency practices, aren't you?
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Look, Katy, thank you for that. We're going to take a break now, and in part two, after looking at the way data has been introduced into the property business, we're now going to look at where it goes in the future, I think. So join me again after the break.
You are watching Property TV. You are watching Property TV.
Hello, welcome back to part two of Property Matters. We're discussing data in the property industry today, and with me is Katy Billany, who's kindly explained where the data sources come from, how it started, what we've left behind. So now we're going to talk about what we've got coming. I think that's going to be some fun. Now, Katy, you've explained that you've got over 4,000 data sources. You must have a horrendous job collating all this information. I don't know how many people you've got on this.
Luckily, it's not my job.
Okay, good. Well, we'll both leave that one behind. But obviously, your business does come to conclusions, and therefore the people accessing your services want sight of those conclusions. I'm interested to know the sort of subjects an average agency would want to discuss with you, the information they'd want to learn. Tell me the type of thing they would have.
In terms of learnings, I think that the most relevant part of our data for an agent is looking at their own performance compared to their competitors. As I said before, when we're going back to the early 90s, the only way of doing that would be to go and look and try and see how many boards they had compared to you, or look in their window and see how many properties they had listed in there. Whereas now you can actually, using our tools, you can actually track your own performance online on a daily basis. It's updated, as I say, every day, and they can actually see, who is operating in their patch, who is growing in their patch, who's valuing and undervaluing and overvaluing, and how much do they actually get for the client at the end. So
that's really interesting.
It is.
It?
It's one of the most interesting talking points when agents kind of get access to our reporting suite. They're always really interested in that because it's very useful to be able to see, well, okay, so my competitor up the road actually is overvaluing properties by 5%, which you wouldn't necessarily think would be a good thing. In fact, if you're that agent's competitor, you might be going to the vendor and saying, oh well, they always overvalue, but we're accurate, so we'll sell your house faster and for the right amount of money. But actually, if you can see that this agent is overvaluing by 5%, but they're only having to reduce it by 1% in order to sell it, whereas you're valuing it at its value, but then selling it at that value or maybe even a little bit less, actually the agent that's overvaluing is not only getting a better result for the vendor, but also making themselves more money. And I'm not kind of saying that agents should be overvaluing, but it's just an example of a really interesting way of looking at data.
But it also has a real value for the consumer, doesn't it? Because I mean, the classic thing in the past has been an agent will overvalue to get the instruction. Within a fortnight, you're being told that they'd made a slight mistake or the market's changed,
Yeah.
and you'd better drop it. And it's very hard to decide whether these agents are, I don't want to do them a disservice, but being genuine, or whether they're just being very aggressive in terms of getting instructions. I mean, I've seen agencies who have the ethos that, you know, unless you've got the thing on your books, you ain't never going to sell it. So say whatever you like to get it, and then we'll worry about the consequences later. But that's not very fair and not very helpful for consumers overall. And I think part of what you're supplying there is so useful. I mean, that can have a real industry impact, can't it?
It can, and so the reports can not only be used for kind of internal purposes, but also for, you know, a consumer view, because it is really useful for a consumer to know, how much is this agent going to sell my property for? How quickly are they going to sell it? And, you know, where do they stack up in terms of the number of properties that they sell compared to their competitors in my area?
The teaching in the property industry is, if you ask the question, people will say, well, don't just have one agent round to value your house, have three. The problem then comes when you get three different values and you say, which one do I take?
Yeah.
You know, do I go with the top one? Do I go with the bottom one? Do I go with the middle one? I don't know. But it seems again that if you're subscribing agents can actually show some evidence of their accuracy, I mean, that's tremendously useful.
Yeah, and I think that that's another good example of how things have progressed within the industry in terms of accessible data, because it was quite difficult for agents to be able to back up their valuations when they were going to a market appraisal, whereas now they can collate data from various different sources so that they can demonstrate to a potential vendor exactly why they've valued their property in the way that they have. They can pull in comparables, they can look at all of the information that they hold on the property itself and surrounding properties, and then look at the market activity in the area, and they can use all of that to validate their decision-making process to the vendor, which then builds confidence in that particular agent. You know, if you've got three agents that are coming around to value your property, but only one of them goes to that extent to tell you why they've valued it, then you're going to choose that one, aren't you?
Are you involved with valuers? Do you supply them with information too?
So we do. We work with some mortgage businesses, but we don't work with surveyors specifically. Our data could definitely be used for that, and I know that there's lots of sources of data that they
I mean, I seem to have spent a lifetime arguing with valuers about the value of property, you know, especially in sort of new build. You know, you get valuers come in and they either like or don't like the building that you've just done, and they'll decide as a policy to sort of undervalue it by 10, 15, 20%, depending on what the instructions are from the bank or building society in terms of safety margins. You have their own considerations of being vulnerable to being sued if they get it wrong from a lender. And I would have thought your sort of data information would do an awful lot to bring that into line and make it sensible. I mean, most people don't understand the catastrophic effect of an undervaluation can have on your own property and your ability to take a mortgage for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's been quite widely discussed at the moment because of the fact that property prices have gone up so much. I mean, 19% in the last 2 years, the average asking price. But the mortgage companies are now starting to rattle against that, and they're downvaluing properties that are in chains. And actually having data, whether it's from the estate agency side or whether it's provided directly to the surveyors, actually having that data to back up why the decision was made to value it at that point is really important.
I really would consider that a huge step forward in the industry. I mean, it's the one area of expertise that doesn't seem to have moved on. It's still very much, I know they go back and they do these desktop valuations, and sometimes now they don't even come to look at the property. It's just all done on computer. Maybe that's good, maybe it's bad, but it has to be consistent, doesn't it?
Yes, and I think the problem is that it definitely isn't. You know, I think that once we get past the stage of a sale being agreed, and we move into conveyancing and surveying and all of the mortgage application information, there isn't a lot of consistency. And that is one of the things that's causing problems with the length of time it's taken to progress property sales at the moment. They've increased from 12 weeks, which is what everybody still thinks it is, but you know, it was 3 years ago, but now it's 22 weeks. So it takes nearly 5 months from the point at which a property is agreed a sale to actually complete on it.
Okay. Well, I have a sort of consulting background on developments, and you've hit a number of subjects there that I think would be invaluable to developers. First of all, when people go into development, if they're fairly new, the one thing they forget is time. Okay, they forget to take into account the time it's going to take to develop the property, the time it takes between having the idea and handing over those keys. And as you've just said, it's spread enormously now. I've been in a situation where a development's been looking for funding prior to building, and the banks will say, well, go out and get 20% of your sales done. So what do? You go out to Hong Kong, Singapore or wherever, you get 20% of your sales. You come back and then the bank say, well, that's all right, but these are sort of not UK nationals, so we'd have great difficulty in enforcing the contract. So couldn't you have got some UK buyers, institutions? So you go out and you get some institutional investors to take 2, 3, 4 floors. Obviously they want a discount. You then go back and report it to the bank, and the bank say, well, that's very good, except the price you've got isn't very good, is it? It's nothing like you told us you'd get. You know, so again, I can just see a developer getting hold of all your information, putting all these bits together, and at least making allowance for all these problems. I'm not saying you're going to cure them, but you could make the allowance, which would, I can see in the future, and we'll talk about the future in a minute, but I can see in the future we're going to have a bit of a catastrophic 2 or 3 years coming on with new developments. I think there'll be a lot of unfinished developments. A lot of people can't raise the money to finish what they've started. And all these considerations can be dealt with if you have the knowledge to start with.
Yes.
And that's where you come in, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that even though the planning process is a big part of developing, there's certain parts of the planning process
we'll
that
do another program on that. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, absolutely. I think that having that level of upfront information about the area, the market, the types of people that buy in that kind of area, who lives in that area, what kind of amenities are there, you know, that's all really important information that is often kind of, you know, neglected. They just think that it, you know, that, oh, that'll be a good spot.
Yeah. Not quite that easy, is it? We've talked about the past, we've talked about the future. We engage with a lot of property people here, obviously, and one of the burning questions is, after COVID, where are we going? How's the market going to be? Is it going to be any different from the normal sort of cyclical changes, or is it going to be a special situation up or down? So I presume you've taken pre-COVID measurements of the market at that point. Where are we going?
So at the moment, we're still suffering from the huge stock issues. You know, at the moment, I think that the majority of the country, apart from Scotland and inner London, have got less than 2 months worth of stock left to sell. And without sounding like it's depressing, but that's 50%. You know, it's 50% of usual levels. Demand is far higher than supply, and I think that a lot of people thought that that would kind of start leveling out this year. There's been reports from the property portals that they're starting to see more instructions coming to the market, but our data doesn't say the same thing. You know, we look at actual instructions; they're more looking at buyer sentiment and inquiries. But I think that we will continue to probably see that throughout the rest of the year. We're on track for about 1.2 million sales this year if we carry on at the same level. So it will still be a buoyant market, but hopefully things will start to regulate in terms of more supply coming to the market when we move into next year. But it will just depend on the financial situation, I think.
Katy Billany from 20EA, thank you very much for all that informative information. You've been absolutely amazing. I think we've all learnt an awful lot this morning, so thank you for that. I hope we do see you again on another programme. We'll look at some of these more detailed subjects later on, but thank you again for coming in. So that's all we've got time for in this edition of Property Matters. Thanks for watching. I'm Stephen Galpin. Look forward to seeing you next time.